For a man who built a global empire on cold, hard logic, Julian Thorne's one irrational rule was absolute: he would never, under any circumstances, do significant business with a black woman. He just never imagined the one person who held the key to his company's future, and his own frozen heart, would be the very woman he was preconditioned to despise. Welcome back to CJ Stories, where we bring you emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul. If you're just joining us for the first time, you're welcome to this wonderful big family. We're so glad to have you here. Please make sure to watch till the end, and if today's story moves you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with your family and loved ones. Now, let's dive into today's story. The air in Julian Thorne's 80th floor office was thin and tasted of success, a sterile blend of citrus-based cleaner, expensive leather, and the faint, metallic tang of ionized air. It was a kingdom of glass and steel, suspended over the sprawling, chaotic heart of New York City. From his minimalist throne, a chair that cost more than most people's cars, Julian surveyed his domain. The city was a grid of transactions, a complex algorithm of profit and loss, and he was its master. His world was one of control, of predictable outcomes and meticulously managed variables. There was no room for emotion, no tolerance for chaos. His gaze fell upon a young analyst, Kiana, standing nervously before his monolithic desk. She was sharp, a Wharton graduate with a portfolio of successes that should have guaranteed her a swift ascent up the corporate ladder at Thorne Industries. She was also black. And for Julian, that was an unacceptable variable. "Your projections on the Singapore acquisition were adequate, Kiana," Julian said, his voice as cool and polished as the marble floor. He didn't look at her, instead tapping a rhythm on his tablet. Each tap was a precise, calculated dismissal. "Adequate, sir?" Kiana's voice wavered, but she held her ground. "My models predicted the currency fluctuation to within 0.1%. We saved the firm nearly $9 million in exposure. You missed the political instability in the region. A variable that could have cost us double," he countered, the lie tasting like nothing at all. It was a fabricated excuse, a piece of corporate jargon designed to be unassailable. He finally lifted his eyes, his gaze a piercing, Arctic blue. "Thorne Industries isn't a place for adequate. It's a place for perfection. Your probationary period is concluded. We won't be extending a permanent offer. Security will escort you out." He watched, impassive, as the color drained from her face. He saw the flicker of confusion, then the dawning, sickening realization that her performance had nothing to do with this. It was a look he'd seen before, on the faces of others like her. A brief, almost imperceptible memory surfaced, the scent of rain on hot asphalt, the slam of a car door, his mother's tear-streaked face turning away from a woman with kind eyes and dark skin. He shoved the memory down, encasing it in ice. It was a distraction. Weakness. His personal assistant, a pale, deferential man named Peterson, materialized silently at his side as Kiana was led away. "Sir, the arrangements for the annual Thorne Foundation Gala are behind schedule. The previous event coordinator resigned." Julian waved a dismissive hand. "Find another one. And for the floral arrangements, find someone new. The last firm was utterly pedestrian. I want something that speaks of power, innovation. Something unforgettable. Spare no expense." "Of course, sir," Peterson said, already backing away. Julian turned back to the window, the city lights beginning to glitter like scattered diamonds. He had built this empire from the ashes of his father's legacy, molding it with a ruthless precision that left no room for error. His prejudice wasn't a product of ignorance. He considered it a data-driven conclusion, a risk management strategy born from a single, catastrophic event in his childhood that he had long since twisted into a rigid, unassailable law of his universe. He was successful. He was in control. And he was utterly, profoundly alone. As Julian surveyed his cold kingdom of glass, have you ever witnessed a prejudice so deep it seemed unshakable? What do you think it takes for a person to even begin to question their own long-held biases? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 3 miles away, in a vibrant, bustling corner of Brooklyn, the air was thick with life. It smelled of damp earth, sweet jasmine, and the spicy, peppery scent of carnations. This was Petal and Stem, Amara Vance's world. It wasn't a kingdom, it was a sanctuary, a riot of color and fragrance crammed into a small, charming storefront with a perpetually fogged-up front window. Amara moved with the practiced grace of an artist. Her hands, dusted with pollen and stained faintly green at the fingertips, hovered over a bucket of deep crimson dahlias. She wasn't just arranging flowers, she was telling a story. With each stem she placed, she wove emotions, joy for a wedding, comfort for a loss, love for a new beginning. "This one," she murmured to herself, holding up a dahlia whose petals unfurled like a tiny, velvet explosion. This one has soul. The bell above the door chimed, and an elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, shuffled in, her face a roadmap of worry. Amara, dear. It's my Henry's anniversary. The first one since, you know. Amara's focus shifted instantly. She wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter, her warm, expressive eyes filled with a gentle empathy. I remember, Mrs. Gable. White lilies, for remembrance. And maybe, she added softly, picking up a single, bright yellow freesia, one of these. For the beautiful memories. Mrs. Gable's eyes welled up. You always know, child. You have your grandmother's gift. Amara's heart swelled at the mention of her grandmother, the woman who had first put a trowel in her hand and taught her that flowers were the world's way of smiling. This shop was her legacy, her dream. It was also, she knew with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, on the verge of financial collapse. The rent was increasing, suppliers were demanding payment up front, and the slow trickle of neighborhood regulars wasn't enough to keep the dream alive. She needed something big. A lifeline. Later that evening, after sweeping the last of the fallen leaves from the floor, she sat at her small, cluttered desk in the back, a stack of overdue bills staring accusingly at her. Her best friend and part-time helper, Chloe, burst in, waving her phone like a winning lottery ticket. You are not going to believe this. Chloe exclaimed, her energy sucking the exhaustion right out of the room. The Thorne Foundation Gala. They're looking for a new floral designer. Amara, this is the event of the year. The budget is basically infinite. This is it. This is the contract that saves us. Amara's heart gave a hopeful, terrifying leap. The Thorne Foundation. Run by the infamous Julian Thorne. A man known as a corporate shark, a recluse, a genius with a reputation for being impossibly demanding. Chloe, they're not going to hire a little shop from Brooklyn. They work with massive, international firms. No. Chloe insisted, shoving the phone in her face. The brief says they want innovation, artistry, and a unique narrative. That's not a firm, Amara, that's you. It says proposals are being fast-tracked. You have to do this. Doubt warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This was the kind of opportunity she had only dreamed of. A chance to not just save the shop, but to showcase her art on the grandest stage imaginable. The risk of rejection was immense, but the risk of not trying, of letting her grandmother's legacy wither and die, was far greater. For the next 48 hours, she poured every ounce of her soul into the proposal. She didn't just suggest flower arrangements, she designed an experience. An ephemeral garden that would transform the sterile ballroom into a living, breathing narrative of growth and renewal. She used rare, exotic blooms to represent the foundation's global reach and humble, local wildflowers to symbolize its community roots. It was ambitious, personal, and the best work she had ever done. With a trembling finger, she attached the file to an email and hit send, a silent prayer whispered into the digital void. 2 days later, an email with the subject line, Thorne Foundation Gala, Floral Design Proposal, landed in her inbox. Her breath hitched. She clicked it open, her eyes scanning the text, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was from a Mr. Peterson. He called her concept compelling and refreshingly audacious. He was inviting her for a final stage meeting. With Mr. Thorne himself. Chloe's shriek of joy was deafening. But as the initial euphoria subsided, a cold knot of dread began to form in Amara's stomach. She was stepping into the lion's den. She, a small-time artist, was about to pitch her soul to a king of commerce. The weight of the moment was immense, everything she had ever worked for rested on this one meeting. As she stood before her closet, trying to pick an outfit that screamed creative genius and not terrified florist, she had no idea that the man she was about to meet wasn't just a difficult billionaire, but a man whose entire worldview was built on a foundation of hate that was about to collide head-on with her very existence. The city lights beckoned, promising either her salvation or her ruin. The lobby of Thorne Tower was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous cathedral of white marble and dark, polished wood, so quiet you could hear the soft whir of the silent, efficient security guards' radios. Amara clutched her portfolio, its leather cool against her clammy hands. She felt like a vibrant wildflower trying to take root in a glacier. She announced herself to the receptionist, whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and was directed to a private elevator. The ride up was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. 80 floors in 45 seconds. The doors opened with a soft hiss, not into another lobby, but directly into an antechamber that was stark, empty, and dominated by a single door. This was it. In his office, Julian Thorne was finishing a call. Liquidate the assets. All of them. I don't care about the sentiment, I care about the return. He hung up, the finality of his tone echoing in the silent room. Peterson appeared at his elbow. Sir, Ms. Amara Vance is here for the gala meeting. Julian sighed, annoyed at the interruption. Already? Fine. Send her in. He didn't bother looking up from his tablet, already moving on to the next multi-million-dollar decision. He remembered the proposal, audacious, yes, but different. He was tired of the same sycophantic pitches. He was prepared to be unimpressed. The heavy door swung open. Amara took a steadying breath and stepped inside, a polite, professional smile fixed on her face. "Mr. Thorne? Thank you for seeing me. I'm Amara Vance." The sound of her voice, calm, clear, and melodic, made him pause. It was not what he was expecting. Slowly, he lifted his head. And the world stopped. Across the vast expanse of his office, he saw her. A black woman, poised and radiant, her vibrant dress a stark contrast to the monochrome sterility of her surroundings. She stood there, a living, breathing embodiment of the one variable he refused to allow in his life. His mind screeched to a halt. The carefully constructed walls of his prejudice slammed into place, cold and absolute. His face, which had been set in a mask of bored indifference, hardened into a sheet of glacial contempt. The air crackled, thick with unspoken history and instantaneous animosity. Amara's smile faltered, the warmth in her eyes flickering as she met his chilling, hostile stare. She had walked in expecting a business meeting, but what she found was a declaration of war she didn't even understand. The silence in Julian Thorne's office wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a physical presence. It pressed in on Amara, heavy and cold, sucking the warmth from her skin. The man behind the desk looked at her as if she were something vile he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. The shift was instantaneous and total. One moment, he was a disengaged businessman, the next, a specter of pure, undiluted loathing. Amara's professional smile dissolved. Her heart, which had been hammering with nervous excitement, now beat a slow, painful rhythm of dread. She felt her posture shrink, a primal instinct to make herself smaller in the face of a predator. Every cell in her body screamed at her to turn and run, to flee the suffocating hostility of the room and return to the familiar, fragrant chaos of her shop. But then, the image of the overdue bills flashed in her mind. The memory of her grandmother's hands, covered in soil, planting the seeds of a dream that was now hers to protect. The sound of Chloe's triumphant shriek. This wasn't just about her pride. It was about survival. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing shards of glass, she forced her shoulders back. She lifted her chin, meeting his icy glare with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. She had come here to fight for her dream, and she would not be broken by a look. "Mr. Thorne," she began again, her voice a little tight but miraculously steady. "My proposal for the ephemeral garden is designed to do more than just decorate a room. It's about creating a journey for your guests, a narrative that reflects the Foundation's mission of growth and renewal." Julian remained silent, his expression unreadable, his eyes boring into her. He didn't invite her to sit. He didn't move. He simply watched, letting her talk into the void. It was a power play, designed to unnerve and dominate. Refusing to be rattled, Amara walked toward the large conference table, her heels clicking with defiant purpose on the marble. She opened her portfolio, the rich leather a warm, familiar comfort. She spread out the sketches, her hands moving with newfound confidence as she connected with her art. The vibrant watercolors and detailed botanical drawings were a splash of life in the sterile mausoleum of his office. "The entrance will be a forest floor," she explained, her passion overriding her fear. "Mosses, ferns, the scent of damp earth. It represents the humble beginnings, the grassroots from which great things grow. As guests move further in, the arrangements become taller, more structured. We introduce wildflowers, symbols of resilience and unexpected beauty found in harsh environments." She pointed to a breathtaking sketch of the main ballroom. "The centerpiece will be the canopy of hope. We'll suspend thousands of white orchids and trailing amaranthus from the ceiling, creating a living chandelier. Below, the tables will feature arrangements of birds of paradise and protea, flowers that are bold, unique, and require fire to germinate, a metaphor for the transformative power of adversity that the Foundation champions." She spoke for 10 minutes, her voice gaining strength and melody as she lost herself in the story she had created. She laid out the logistics, the sourcing of rare blooms, the timeline. It was a flawless presentation, innovative, meaningful, and logistically sound. For a moment, she forgot the man watching her and remembered only the artist within. Julian, however, had not forgotten. He listened, and with every word she spoke, the conflict inside him raged. The businessman in him, the cold, logical architect of his fortune, was impressed. The proposal was brilliant. It was exactly what he had asked for, unforgettable, powerful, innovative. It would make his gala the talk of the city. It was, by every objective metric, perfect. But the other part of him, the wounded boy, the man ruled by a single, calcified prejudice, was repulsed. Her confidence was galling. Her passion, an affront. Her very presence in his sanctum was a violation. He saw his mother's face, turning away from a black woman on a rain-slicked street. He heard the screech of tires, the shattering of glass. The memory, a venomous whisper, told him this was a mistake. That her kind brought nothing but ruin. He had to find a flaw. He scanned the proposal, his eyes darting over the budget, the sourcing details, looking for a weakness, an error, any logical reason to say no. There was none. Her work was impeccable. This infuriated him even more. She finished her presentation, her hands resting on her sketches, her chest rising and falling with the exertion of her performance. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before. She looked at him, her eyes hopeful but guarded. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the polished surface of his desk. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. Your ideas are ambitious. The word was an insult. But you've overlooked a critical component. Amara's brow furrowed. What's that, sir? He held her gaze, his blue eyes turning to chips of ice. Trust, he said, his voice dropping lower, each word a carefully aimed dart. Legacy isn't built on pretty flowers and fanciful narratives, Ms. Vance. It's built on strength, on history, on a foundation of reliability. Why, he paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the air, a guillotine poised to fall, should I entrust my family's legacy, the most important night of my year, to someone like you? The phrase, someone like you, echoed in the vast, silent office. It was vile. It was personal. It was undisguised racism, slicked over with a thin veneer of corporate doublespeak. The blow landed exactly as he'd intended, a gut punch designed to shatter her composure and expose the insecurity he was certain lay beneath. He expected her to flinch, to stammer, to crumble. Amara felt the air leave her lungs. The room swam for a second. The insult was so blatant, so cruel, it was almost surreal. A hot, furious shame washed over her, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. Her grandmother had faced this. Her parents had faced this. And now, in a glass tower in the sky, she was facing it too. Crumble? No. Not today. Have you ever been judged unfairly before you even had a chance to speak? How do you find the strength to stand up for yourself in a moment like that? Share your experience in the comments. She straightened her spine until it felt like a rod of steel. She looked him dead in the eye, the hurt in her own transforming into a blazing fire. Someone like me, she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Let me tell you about someone like me, Mr. Thorne. Someone like me understands legacy better than you can imagine. My grandmother built her business from nothing but a handful of seeds and hands calloused from turning soil that didn't want to yield. She faced people like you every single day, people who looked at the color of her skin and saw a weed, not a flower. But she taught me that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build, day by day, with integrity and soul. It's about creating beauty where others see only dirt. She took a step closer to his desk, her fear completely burned away by her righteous fury. You ask why you should trust me? You should trust me because my art isn't a commodity. It has a heart. It tells a story. Something your balance sheets can't quantify. You want to know if I'm reliable? I'm still standing here, pitching my heart out in a room where I'm clearly not wanted. That's not just reliability, Mr. Thorne. That's resilience. It's the very thing you claim to admire. Julian was stunned into silence. He had expected tears, apologies, a hasty retreat. He had not expected a warrior. Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow, dismantling his attack and turning it back on him. She hadn't just defended herself, she had challenged the very core of his philosophy. Integrity and soul, the words mocked him, echoing in the empty spaces of his life. The two parts of his brain were at war. The logician was screaming that she was magnificent. She was fire and steel. Her design was genius, and her spirit was unbreakable. She was an asset. Hire her, the prejudiced child was screaming that she was dangerous. She was chaos. She was the ghost of a past he refused to face. Destroy her. Caught in the paralyzing crossfire of his own mind, he did something he never did. He improvised. He couldn't give her the contract, that would be admitting defeat. But he couldn't let her go, that would be an act of colossal stupidity. Resilience is proven through action, Ms. Vance, not speeches, he said, his tone clipped as he wrestled back control. Your proposal is theoretical. I require a practical demonstration. He stood and walked to the window, gesturing down at the city below. I am unimpressed with the floral design in my building's main atrium. It is stale, uninspired. I want it gone. All of it. He turned back to face her, his face an inscrutable mask. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning to redesign it. The entire space. If your art can transform that soulless cavern into something that makes me feel something, we will discuss the gala contract. If it fails, he let the word hang in the air, you will leave this building, and I will forget your name. You will have full access to the premises and an unlimited budget for the task. But you have one shot. Is that understood? It was an impossible task. Redesigning and executing a floral installation for a space that size in less than 12 hours was insane. It was a test designed for failure. A way for him to dismiss her while maintaining the illusion of fairness. Amara looked at him, at this cold, broken man hiding in his glass fortress. She saw the challenge for what it was, a trap. But she also saw it as the only door left open. A sliver of a chance. She thought of her shop, of her grandmother, of the fire now coursing through her veins. Understood, she said, her voice ringing with clarity. You'll have your demonstration, Mr. Thorne. With a final, defiant look, she turned and walked out of the office, her head held high. The heavy door closed behind her, leaving Julian alone in the sudden, deafening silence. He stared at the spot where she had stood, a vibrant ghost of color and fire in his gray world. He felt agitated, unsettled. For the first time in years, a variable had entered his equation that he could not control. As the door clicked shut, Peterson, who had been waiting discreetly in the antechamber, stepped inside. He held a tablet with Amara's file open. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a flicker of something Julian couldn't quite decipher. An audacious choice, sir. Giving her the atrium challenge. She's an audacious woman, Julian snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare crack in his composure. She'll fail. They always do. Peterson hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to be noticeable. Perhaps, sir. I was just reviewing her submitted references again. It's a small detail, but I thought you might find it interesting. What is it, Peterson? Julian asked, his patience wearing thin. Peterson looked down at the tablet, then back up at his boss. Her pro bono work. She's the lead volunteer for the horticultural therapy program at St. Jude's Children's Home. The one in the Bronx. He paused, letting the name settle in the air. The same home your mother was the primary benefactor for. The one she was driving home from, on the day of the accident. The world tilted. Julian froze, his hand halfway to his tie. St. Jude's, the name was a key, unlocking a dark, rusted door in his mind that he had bolted shut for 30 years. The scent of rain on asphalt, his mother's laughter, the sudden, terrible screech of tires. And the face of the woman she had been talking to just moments before, a woman with kind eyes and dark skin, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. His carefully constructed reality fractured, and for a split second, the cold, powerful billionaire vanished, replaced by a terrified 10-year-old boy, standing alone on a wet sidewalk. The connection was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. But as he stared blankly at Peterson, a terrifying, unwelcome question began to claw its way into his consciousness. Who was Amara Vance? The name St. Jude's detonated in the sterile silence of Julian's office. It wasn't a sound, it was a shockwave, collapsing 30 years of meticulously constructed denial in a single, devastating instant. The air thickened, charged with the ghosts of a memory he'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. He saw it with blinding clarity. His mother, radiant, laughing as she handed a check to a woman outside the orphanage. He was in the back of the town car, impatient, tapping on the glass. His mother had turned, blowing him a kiss, her eyes shining with the unique joy she only found when she was giving. The woman she spoke with, a black woman with a gentle face, had handed her a small, wild-looking bouquet in thanks. Daisies and black-eyed Susans. Then his mother had gotten back in the car, the scent of rain and those simple flowers filling the space. The light turned green. A truck horn blared. Julian stumbled back, a hand flying to his chest as if to physically hold himself together. The glass walls of his office seemed to press in, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear. Sir? Mr. Thorne? Peterson's voice was a distant echo, laced with a professional concern that bordered on alarm. He had never seen his boss lose his composure. Not once. Get out, Julian rasped, his voice raw, unrecognizable. Sir, perhaps I should call. Get out, he roared, the sound ripping from his throat. Peterson vanished, the door closing with a soft, deferential click. Julian was left alone, gasping for air in the vacuum of his own past. He staggered to the window, his reflection a pale, haunted stranger superimposed over the glittering city. The prejudice he had nurtured for 3 decades, the one he'd codified into a business strategy and a personal creed, had never been about logic. It was a shield. A warped, twisted monument built over the grave of his mother, designed to blame someone, anyone, for the random, senseless tragedy that had stolen her from him. In his 10-year-old mind, the cause and effect were simple. His mother had stopped to help a black woman, and then she was gone. Therefore, they were the cause. They were the risk. They were the chaos that had shattered his perfect world. And now, that chaos had a name, Amara Vance. And she was downstairs, in his building, weaving her flowers, her soul, into the very foundation of his empire. The coincidence was too great, too monstrous. It felt like a cosmic joke, a deliberate act of cruelty by a universe he thought he had mastered. He had to know. With trembling hands, he pulled up his private network, his fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing corporate channels and engaging the services of a discreet, frighteningly efficient private investigator he kept on retainer. The instructions were simple and brutal. Amara Vance. Petal and stem, Brooklyn. I want to know everything. Her family, her history, her connection to St. Jude's Children's Home. Now. The reply was instantaneous. ETA, 4 hours. 4 hours. 4 hours until he knew if he was losing his mind or if his mother's ghost had truly walked back into his life. He sank into his chair, the leather cool against his feverish skin. The test he had given Amara, the impossible atrium challenge, was no longer about her. It was about him. He had unknowingly commanded her to build an altar in the heart of his temple, and he didn't know if he was meant to worship at it or tear it down. Downstairs, the atrium of Thorn Tower was a cavern of soulless grandeur. Towering white walls, a cold marble floor, and in the center, a raised platform with a collection of generic, lifeless orchids that looked more plastic than real. It was a space designed to impress, not to welcome. Amara stood in the center of it, hands on her hips, a general surveying her battlefield. The fury that had propelled her out of Julian's office had now cooled into a white-hot, diamond-hard determination. He wanted a demonstration? He would get one. He wanted to feel something? She would make him feel everything. Chloe arrived minutes later, a whirlwind of moral support and caffeinated energy, followed by a small, loyal crew from the Brooklyn floral market, burly men who usually hauled crates of roses but who would do anything for Amara. He gave you until 9 a.m.? Chloe screeched, her voice echoing in the vast space. Is he insane? This would take a professional team a week. Then we'll have to be better than professional, Amara said, her eyes alight with a feverish, creative fire. He thinks he's testing my skill. He's not. He's testing my spirit. She unrolled her sketches on the floor, the crew gathering around. Her vision was no longer just the ephemeral garden, it was an act of rebellion. This wouldn't be a gentle narrative of growth. This would be a defiant explosion of life. We got this place, she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Those orchids are the first to go. I want every surface covered. We're building a world. A place so alive he can't ignore it. The challenge galvanized them. It was a classic underdog story, and they were all in. With the unlimited budget Julian had foolishly granted her, Amara became a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. Calls were made to all-night suppliers across the tri-state area. Trucks were dispatched. The atrium floor was covered in protective sheeting. As the first truck arrived, laden with birch trees and massive rolls of living moss, have you ever been given a challenge so impossible it lit a fire in you? What does it feel like to channel anger and injustice into creativity? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. Chloe managed the logistics, her phone seemingly glued to her ear, while Amara directed the artistic vision. The stale orchids were ripped out and unceremoniously discarded. The burly market workers, accustomed to delicate buds, found themselves hauling entire trees into the lobby, securing them to the central platform to create the skeleton of a forest. Amara was everywhere at once. She directed the placement of every branch, her hands shaping the initial form. She worked in a trance, fueled by adrenaline, coffee, and a deep, burning need to prove him wrong. She wasn't just arranging flowers, she was waging war. A war of beauty against sterility, of soul against emptiness. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion began to set in. One of the younger crew members, Miguel, nearly dropped a heavy bucket of water. Amara, this is crazy. We're never going to finish. Amara stopped, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She looked around at the controlled chaos, trees standing where there were none, sheets of moss waiting to be laid, thousands of flowers in buckets, their colors a vibrant promise in the harsh fluorescent light. They were tired. They were overwhelmed. She took a deep breath, the scent of fresh-cut pine invigorating her. Look at me, Miguel, she said, her voice soft but firm. He thinks we can't do this. He looks at us and sees less. He expects us to fail. We are not going to give him the satisfaction. Every leaf we place, every flower we set, is a testament to the fact that he is wrong. We're not just filling a space. We are showing him what a soul looks like. Her words rippled through the tired crew. They looked at each other, then back at her, their exhaustion replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than a job. It was a mission. With a collective nod, they turned back to their work, a quiet intensity settling over the atrium. As the sun began to hint at its arrival, staining the sky outside the glass doors a pale, bruised purple, the forest began to bloom. Amara, perched on a ladder, was weaving delicate fairy lights through the branches of the birch trees. Below her, Chloe was directing the placement of thousands of white hyacinths and paperwhites, their intoxicating fragrance beginning to fill the air. They laid down the moss, creating a lush, green carpet underfoot. They tucked in ferns, hostas, and clusters of deep blue delphiniums that rose like spires from the forest floor. It was a miracle. A defiant, living, breathing wilderness in the heart of a concrete jungle. At 7 a.m., Amara stood back, her body aching, her hands raw, her clothes stained with dirt and chlorophyll. It was done. The atrium was unrecognizable. It wasn't an installation, it was a sanctuary. The air was thick with the scent of earth and blooms, a heady, intoxicating perfume that was the very antithesis of the building's usual sterile citrus smell. The fairy lights in the trees twinkled like captured stars. It was magical. It was alive. And it was a direct reflection of her soul. Chloe hugged her, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Amara. It's a masterpiece." Amara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had met his impossible challenge. She had poured her anger, her hope, and her history into this creation. Whatever happened next, she had not failed. She had answered his hatred with overwhelming, undeniable beauty. She looked at the clock on the wall. 7:15 a.m. All they could do now was wait. Upstairs, Julian hadn't slept. He stared at his computer screen, the investigator's report open before him. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard facts that felt like blows to his solar plexus. Amara Vance. Born in Brooklyn. Daughter of Michael and Lena Vance. Granddaughter of Elspeth Vance, founder of a small community flower shop, also in Brooklyn. He scrolled down, his heart pounding. Elspeth Vance. Extensive community involvement. Founder of the horticultural therapy program at St. Jude's Children's Home in 1985. She believed flowers could heal traumatized children. She ran the program as a volunteer for over 30 years. His breath hitched. The report included a scanned photo from an old Bronx newspaper, dated the year of his mother's accident. It was a photo of the St. Jude's annual charity drive. In the center was his mother, Caroline Thorne, beaming as she handed a large donation check to a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The caption identified her as Elspeth Vance. In Elspeth's hands was a small, wild bouquet of daisies and black-eyed Susans. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a direct line. The woman his mother had stopped for, the woman he had unknowingly blamed for her death for his entire life, was Amara's grandmother. The final piece of the report clicked into place, and the floor dropped out from under him. It was a copy of a police report addendum, filed weeks after the accident. The truck driver who had run the red light had been found to have a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. It was a drunk driver. It had been random, senseless, and had nothing to do with where his mother was or who she was talking to. His entire life's prejudice, the core principle of his existence, was built on a child's lie. A lie he had told himself so many times he had mistaken it for the truth. He felt a wave of nausea. The hatred he had directed at Amara, the cold contempt, the impossible test, it was all a monstrous injustice, a sin laid at the feet of a woman who was the living legacy of the person he should have been thanking. He thought of her fiery speech in his office. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build, day by day, with integrity and soul. She had been talking about her grandmother. She had been talking about Elspeth. He looked at the clock. 8:55 a.m. He stood up, his legs unsteady. He had to go down there. He had to see what she had done. He didn't know what he would say. How do you apologize for a lifetime of misdirected hate? How do you look a woman in the eye when you've just discovered you've been desecrating the memory of her family, and your own, for 30 years? He rode the elevator down, each floor a step in a descent into hell. The doors opened, and he stopped dead. The air hit him first. It wasn't air, it was life. The rich, clean scent of soil, of moss, of 1,000 blooming flowers. It was the scent of his mother's garden. It was the scent of the wildflowers in the car on that last day. He took a tentative step forward, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the soft moss that carpeted the marble floor. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. The cold, sterile atrium was gone. In its place was an enchanted forest, pulsing with a gentle, magical light. Trees reached for the ceiling, their branches twinkling. Flowers bloomed in a riot of color, their beauty fierce and untamed. It was more than an arrangement, it was a resurrection. It was everything he had lost. Everything he had denied himself. And in the center of it all, standing in a beam of morning light filtering through the glass doors, was Amara. She was exhausted, smudged with dirt, but she stood tall, a queen in her wild, beautiful kingdom. She looked at him, her expression not of triumph, but of quiet, powerful defiance. He had demanded she make him feel something. And as he stood there, surrounded by the living embodiment of his mother's spirit, created by the granddaughter of the woman he had wrongly blamed for her death, he felt the ice around his heart crack. And then, it shattered. A single, hot tear, the first in 30 years, traced a path down his cheek. Suddenly, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the spell. What in God's name is all this? Julian and Amara turned. Striding into the atrium was a stern-faced, impeccably dressed older woman. Her silver hair was coiled in a tight chignon, and her eyes, the same piercing blue as Julian's, swept over the scene with undisguised horror. It was Eleanor Thorne, Julian's paternal aunt and the formidable matriarch of the Thorne Industries Board. She had flown in unannounced from London for a surprise audit. She took in the moss, the trees, and her gaze finally landed on Amara, a lone black woman standing in the center of the perceived desecration of her family's legacy. Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Julian, I demand you explain this circus," she snapped, her voice echoing in the sacred quiet of the forest. She then fixed Amara with a withering glare, her voice dripping with venom. "And you. Remove yourself from this building. Immediately." She looked back at Julian, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Don't worry, Julian. I'll handle this. I know how you feel about their kind." Eleanor Thorne's words hung in the fragrant air like a toxic frost, instantly chilling the magical warmth of the atrium. Her pronouncement, "I know how you feel about their kind," was a public endorsement of Julian's ugliest secret, spoken with the casual authority of a shared, inviolable truth. It was meant to be an act of solidarity, a signal to Julian that she was here to restore order and eject the unwelcome element. Amara flinched as if struck. After pouring her entire being into this creation, after enduring Julian's personal cruelty and meeting his impossible challenge, to be dismissed so hatefully by this stranger was a final, crushing blow. The last of her defiant energy drained away, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. She looked at Julian, her eyes searching his face, expecting to see the familiar mask of cold contempt snap back into place. She expected him to nod in agreement, to let his powerful aunt handle the dirty work of his prejudice. But the man she saw was not the one she had met yesterday. Julian's face was a maelstrom of emotions, shock, shame, and a burgeoning, unfamiliar fury. The tear that had traced a path down his cheek was a fault line, and Eleanor's words were the tremor that finally broke him open. He looked at his aunt, a woman who had been a surrogate mother to him after the accident, a woman who had nurtured his grief and anger, and for the first time, he saw her role in it all. She hadn't just comforted a grieving boy, she had validated his misdirected hatred, polished it, and helped him weaponize it into a guiding principle. She had helped build his prison of ice. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously low, "that's enough." Eleanor's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in surprise. "Enough? Julian, this is a disgrace. Our headquarters looks like a swamp. And this person," she waved a dismissive, bearing hand toward Amara, "is trespassing." "She is not trespassing," Julian said, taking a step forward, positioning himself slightly between Eleanor and Amara. It was a small, almost unconscious movement, but it was a seismic shift in the dynamics of the room. He was no longer observing. He was protecting. "She is here at my invitation. This," he gestured to the breathtaking forest around them, "is her work. I commissioned it." Eleanor stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. "You commissioned this? Have you lost your mind?" Caroline would be spinning in her grave. The mention of his mother's name was the final spark. Julian's carefully controlled facade, the product of 30 years of practice, crumbled into dust. "Don't you dare speak her name in this room," he snarled, his voice vibrating with a raw, agonizing grief that he had never allowed himself to show. "You have no idea what she would think. You know nothing about her." He turned his back on his stunned aunt and took a step toward Amara. He saw the exhaustion in her posture, the deep, abiding hurt in her eyes. He saw the smudges of dirt on her cheek and the raw skin on her hands. He saw a woman he had tried to break, who had responded not with malice, but with a beauty so profound it had brought him to his knees. The weight of his guilt was crushing. "Miss Vance." "Amara," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "What you've done here, he struggled for a word, but beautiful, genius, perfect, they all felt hollow, inadequate. He looked from her face to the canopy of lights and flowers above. "It's the first true thing I've seen in 30 years. Amara stared at him, bewildered by the sudden, radical transformation. The ice was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability. This was not the man who had looked at her with such hatred. This was a man in pain. Eleanor, recovering from her shock, saw her influence, her control, slipping away. She saw the foundation of the Thorn Empire, which she had helped Julian rebuild according to their shared, rigid rules, being threatened by a florist from Brooklyn. Her expression hardened, her shock replaced by a cold, calculated fury. "Julian, stop this foolishness at once," she commanded. "I don't know what game this woman is playing, but I am putting a stop to it. I am calling security to have her and this mess, removed. As a majority shareholder and a member of the board, I have that authority." She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over the speed dial for building security. This was her final move, a raw exercise of power designed to remind Julian who was truly in charge. The fate of Amara's work, her contract, and her dignity hung in the balance, reducible to a single button press. This moment raises a powerful question. When faced with the chance to break a lifelong pattern of behavior, do we choose the safety of what we've always known, or the terrifying uncertainty of doing what's right? Let us know what you think in the comments. Julian watched his aunt's thumb, and a lifetime of choices flashed before his eyes. He could retreat. He could let her win. He could slip back into the cold, comfortable prison of his prejudice. It would be easy. It would be safe. Or he could make a different choice. The choice his mother would have made. "If you call them, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice quiet but imbued with an unshakable, newfound authority, "I will not only overrule your order, but I will also call an emergency board meeting to have you removed. Not just from the board of Thorn Industries, but from the Thorn Foundation as well. Your services are no longer required." The threat was absolute. It was corporate mutually assured destruction. Eleanor froze, her thumb millimeters from the screen. She looked at her nephew and saw not the pliable, grieving boy she had molded, but a stranger. A man she did not recognize, with his mother's fire in his eyes. Her power, which she had wielded for so long, had just met an immovable object. Her face, a mask of aristocratic certainty, crumpled into a snarl of pure hatred, directed not at Amara, but at Julian. She had lost him. Without another word, she snapped her phone shut, turned on her heel, and stormed out of the atrium, her furious clicking heels the only sound in the enchanted forest. The silence that descended was profound. It was just the two of them now, Julian and Amara, standing in the sanctuary she had built. The immediate threat was gone, but the emotional wreckage remained. Julian finally turned to face Amara fully. The power was gone from his posture, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shame. "Amara," he said, her name a quiet plea. I don't know where to begin." "You can begin," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "by telling me what that was all about. Why you looked at me yesterday like I was less than human." He flinched at the truth of her words. He owed her more than an apology, he owed her the entire, ugly truth. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he began to speak. He told her everything. He told her about the accident, about his mother's work with St. Jude's. He told her about the lie he had created in his 10-year-old mind, the lie that blamed a nameless, faceless black woman for his mother's death. He told her how that lie festered, how his aunt helped it grow, how it became a rigid, hateful rule that governed his entire life. "I built my entire world on a foundation of that hate, Amara," he confessed, his voice breaking. "It was a shield. A way to make sense of something that made no sense. And yesterday, when you walked into my office, you weren't just a candidate for a job. You were the embodiment of the ghost I had been running from my entire life. The hatred I showed you, it had nothing to do with you. It was a 30-year-old monster that I had created." As he spoke, he pulled out his phone and showed her the investigator's report. He showed her the photo of her grandmother, Elspeth, standing next to his mother, Caroline, their faces alight with shared purpose and kindness. Amara stared at the photo, her own tears beginning to well. She saw her grandmother, younger, vibrant, full of the same passion for life that she had passed down. And she saw the woman next to her, a woman with kind eyes so much like the man standing before her. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, horrible and heartbreaking. His cruelty hadn't been random, it was a deeply twisted, misdirected grief. "My grandmother," Amara whispered, touching the screen, "she talked about your mother. She called her Lady Sunshine. She said Mrs. Thorne had a gift for seeing the good in people. After the accident, my grandmother was devastated. She always said the world lost one of its brightest lights that day." Julian's composure finally broke. A sob escaped him, a raw, ragged sound of a heartbreaking and healing all at once. He had spent his life believing his mother was a victim of the very people she had championed. The irony was a dagger to his soul. "She was a better person than I could ever hope to be," he choked out. "And I dishonored her memory. I dishonored your grandmother's memory. What I did to you, the things I thought, there is no excuse. I can only say that I am so sorry." He stood before her, stripped bare of his power, his wealth, his prejudice. He was just a man, drowning in a lifetime of regret, begging for absolution from the one person he had wronged the most. Amara looked at him, at this broken, powerful man. She saw the genuine, agonizing remorse in his eyes. She saw the little boy who had lost his mother and built a fortress around his heart. The anger she had felt, the righteous fury, began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of complex, overwhelming empathy. She had come here to fight a monster, but all she found was a man. "The gala contract," he said, his voice thick. "It's yours. And not just the gala. I want to establish a permanent partnership. The Caroline Thorne and Elspeth Vance Grant for Horticultural Arts. We'll fund community gardens, therapy programs, whatever you think is right. It's the least I can do." He was offering her everything she had ever wanted: financial security, a platform for her art, a chance to expand her grandmother's legacy beyond her wildest dreams. It was a lifeline. It was justice. But as she looked at him, she realized the problem was no longer about a contract or about money. It was about the chasm that lay between them, a canyon carved by 30 years of his hate and a lifetime of her experience. An apology, however sincere, could not simply erase that. She took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I appreciate the offer, Julian. And I believe your apology is sincere." She paused, gathering her strength. "But I can't accept it." Julian's head snapped up, his face a mask of confusion and fresh pain. "What? Why? I'm offering you anything you want." "You're offering me a business deal," she said, her voice soft but firm. "A way to assuage your guilt with money. But this isn't about a budget or a contract anymore. It's about trust. It's about respect. And you can't buy those things, Julian. They have to be earned." She looked around the beautiful, living forest she had created, a testament to her soul. "Yesterday, you tried to destroy me. Today, you want to be my partner. How can I possibly trust that? How do I know that this change in you is real and not just a reaction to your guilt?" She turned to leave, her heart aching. She was walking away from the opportunity of a lifetime. But her integrity, the very thing she had preached to him about, demanded it. "Amara, wait," Julian called out, his voice desperate. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. "Please. Don't go. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything." Amara paused at the edge of her forest, her back to him. The sun was now streaming through the glass doors, illuminating the path out of the building. Freedom and safety were just a few steps away. But behind her was a man who had just begun the long, painful journey out of the darkness. She was torn between her own self-preservation and the flicker of compassion she felt for the man she now understood. Suddenly, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He ignored it, his eyes fixed on Amara's back. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, he glanced at the screen. It was a security alert from his penthouse. An intruder. He was about to dismiss it when a second message came through. It was a single, terrifying photo sent from an unknown number. The photo was of his aunt, Eleanor, standing in his private office. And in her hand was a silver picture frame, a photo of his mother. But Eleanor wasn't just holding it. She was holding a heavy letter opener, its sharp point poised directly over the smiling face in the photograph, a clear and menacing threat. Below the image, a single line of text appeared: "You will regret choosing her over your family. Your mother's legacy will be ashes." The image on Julian's phone was a declaration of war, a hostage situation where the victim was a memory. Eleanor, her face a grotesque mask of triumphant spite, held the letter opener over the smiling face of his mother. Asterisk, "Your mother's legacy will be ashes." Asterisk, the words were a direct threat, a promise to physically and symbolically defile the one pure thing Julian had left in the world. For a terrifying second, Julian was paralyzed. Eleanor had always known his weaknesses. She knew that the memory of his mother was his holiest relic, and she was threatening to desecrate it. He could almost feel the old reflex kicking in: appease her, retreat, sacrifice the present to protect the past. But then he looked at Amara. He saw her standing in the heart of the forest she had built, a testament not just to her own soul, but to the very spirit of the mother Eleanor claimed to be protecting. He saw the strength in her posture, the fire in her eyes, the life she had breathed into this cold, dead space. And he realized that retreating now wouldn't be protecting his mother's legacy, it would be the ultimate betrayal of it. His mother was not in a silver frame. She was in the beauty of a hyacinth, the resilience of a wildflower, the kindness she had shown to Elspeth Vance. His mother's legacy wasn't a static object to be guarded, it was a living force to be championed. The paralysis shattered. In its place came a cold, swift clarity. He knew exactly what to do. He turned his back on his aunt's venomous theatrics in the atrium. His focus was entirely on Amara, his expression a mixture of profound apology and fierce urgency. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice low but powerful. "Don't go anywhere. I will be right back. Please. His plea was so raw, so desperate, that Amara, who had been on the verge of turning and fleeing the entire insane situation, found herself rooted to the spot. Julian didn't run. He walked with a chilling, predatory calm toward the exit, pulling his phone back to his ear. He didn't call security to the atrium. He pressed the speed dial for the head of his personal security detail, a man named Gavin who operated outside the building's standard protocols. "Gavin," Julian said, his voice like chips of ice. "We have a code red. An intruder in my penthouse. Her name is Eleanor Thorne. She is to be considered hostile. She is to be removed from my apartment and escorted off the premises. Force is authorized if necessary. Her access cards to all Thorne properties are to be revoked, effective immediately. Am I clear?" "Crystal, sir," came the clipped reply. "And Gavin," Julian added, pausing at the glass doors. "Have her belongings from the guest suite packed and sent to her hotel. She will not be stepping foot in this building, or any other building I own, ever again." He hung up without waiting for a confirmation. He had just excommunicated his own aunt, the woman who had raised him, with the cold efficiency he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. It was a brutal, necessary amputation. He strode back into the atrium, his eyes finding Amara's across the magical forest floor. Eleanor, who had been basking in her perceived victory, watched him approach, a smug look on her face. She thought he had gone to call security on Amara. "Good," Eleanor said with a satisfied nod. "It's about time you came to your senses and cleaned up this mess." Julian walked right past her, his gaze never leaving Amara. He stopped a few feet from her, creating a protective line between her and his aunt. "I believe," Julian said, his voice echoing in the fragrant air, "that you were in the middle of a business proposition." "One," I interrupted. He looked at Eleanor then, and the cold fury in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. "As the CEO and majority shareholder of this company, I am overriding your ridiculous, prejudiced outburst. Ms. Vance is my guest. This masterpiece," he gestured to the forest, "is her work, commissioned by me. And she is not going anywhere." Eleanor's jaw dropped. "Julian, have you lost your mind? After everything I've done for you? After how I've protected you, protected our family's name from this?" Her gesture was a sweep of disgust at both Amara and her creation. "The only thing you've protected me from is the truth," Julian said, his voice shaking with a 30-year-old rage finally unleashed. "You took a grieving boy's confusion and twisted it into a doctrine of hate. You encouraged it. You nurtured it. You used it to control me. You didn't protect my mother's legacy, you poisoned it." As he spoke, two of Gavin's plainclothed security officers entered the atrium. They were large, impassive men who moved with quiet purpose. They walked directly to Eleanor. "Miss Thorne," one said, his voice polite but unyielding. "We've been asked to escort you from the building." Eleanor stared at them, then at Julian, her face a canvas of disbelief and fury. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed at him. "I just did," Julian replied, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are no longer welcome here, Eleanor. Not in my company. Not in my life." The finality of his words struck her like a physical blow. The power she had wielded over him for his entire life was gone. She had overplayed her hand and lost everything. Her face crumpled, the aristocratic composure dissolving into a snarl of pure hatred. "You will regret this," she spat, as the guards firmly took her by the arms. "You are choosing a stranger over your own blood." "She is not a stranger," Julian said quietly, his eyes on Amara. "Her family has more to do with my mother's legacy than you ever did." Eleanor was escorted out, her furious, muffled protest swallowed by the closing doors. An unnerving silence descended, broken only by the soft, ambient sounds of the forest Amara had built. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the emotional shrapnel filled the air between them. Julian finally turned to face Amara fully. He looked utterly broken, stripped bare of his arrogance and power. All that remained was a man drowning in a sea of shame. "Amara," he began, her name a fragile whisper. I don't know how to start." "You can start," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "by telling me why. Why you looked at me yesterday with such hate. I need to understand." He nodded, accepting the sentence. He owed her the truth. The entire, ugly, unvarnished truth. "My mother, she was my whole world," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Her foundation, her work with children, it was her passion. She was driving home from a fundraising event at St. Jude's Children's Home in the Bronx when she died." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he navigated to the investigator's report. He turned the screen toward her. "I was 10. I told myself a story to make sense of it. A lie. I convinced myself she died because she stopped to talk to a black woman outside the home. That her kindness, her association with your people, was what killed her. It was a child's twisted logic, a way to blame someone. And my aunt, she helped me believe it. That lie became the foundation of my entire life. His finger scrolled down the screen, to the scanned newspaper photograph. He held it out for her to see. This was the woman she stopped for. The woman I have hated, in effigy, for 30 years. Amara looked at the screen, and the world tilted. She saw the photo of her grandmother, Elspeth, vibrant and smiling, standing beside a radiant woman with kind, familiar eyes, Caroline Thorne. Her grandmother had this very picture in a worn album, tucked away with her most precious memories. My grandmother, Amara breathed, her fingers hovering over the screen. She talked about your mother all the time. She called her Lady Sunshine. She said Caroline Thorne had a light that could make anything grow. When the accident happened, my grandmother was heartbroken. She said the world had lost one of its truest souls. She planted a whole garden of white lilies in her memory. The dam inside Julian finally burst. A raw, ragged sob tore from his chest, the sound of a lifetime of grief and guilt breaking free. He had spent his life hating the granddaughter of a woman who had mourned his mother. The sheer, tragic weight of the irony crushed him. She was a better person than I will ever be, he choked out, the words painful and cleansing. And I? I used her memory as a weapon. I dishonored her. I dishonored your grandmother. What I did to you yesterday, the things I thought, the things I felt, there is no apology great enough. I am so sorry, Amara. He stood before her, utterly exposed. He was no longer the billionaire tyrant. He was just the 10-year-old boy, lost and alone, finally admitting his sin. Amara looked at him, at this broken, powerful man. The anger that had fueled her for the past day, the righteous, protective fury, dissolved. In its place, a deep, aching wave of empathy washed over her. She had come here to fight a monster and had found only a man, one who had been trapped in a prison of his own making for 30 years. The gala contract, Julian said, his voice still thick as he tried to pull himself together. It's yours, of course. But that's not enough. It's insulting. I want to do more. I want to create something permanent. The Caroline Thorne and Elspeth Vance Grant for Horticultural Arts. We'll fund community gardens, horticultural therapy programs just like the one she started, scholarships, whatever you want. We will fund it in their name. It's the least I can do to try and right this. He was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of, financial security, a platform to change the world with her art, a way to elevate her grandmother's legacy beyond imagination. It was justice. It was an apology written in blank checks. But Amara remembered what she had told him just the day before. You can't buy trust. It has to be earned, She took a small step toward him, into the heart of her creation. She looked from his tear-streaked face to the twinkling lights in the birch trees. Yesterday, she said softly, I told you I couldn't accept your offer. Because it was about your guilt, not about respect. Julian flinched, expecting the final rejection. But today, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Today is different. You didn't just apologize. You chose. You chose to face the truth, as ugly as it was. You chose to protect me, a stranger, over your own family. You chose to honor our mother's memories instead of hiding behind a lie. You didn't just talk about change, Julian. You acted. She reached out, her hand hovering in the space between them. I will not be your partner to assuage your guilt. But I will be your partner to build a new legacy. One that our mothers, and grandmothers, would be proud of. Julian looked at her hand, then back at her face, his eyes wide with a fragile, dawning hope. Slowly, reverently, he reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, dusted with the faint scent of soil and life. His was cold. As their fingers intertwined, it felt like the first ray of sun on a frozen landscape. Thank you, he whispered, the words carrying the weight of a lifetime of gratitude. The journey ahead would be long. Trust, once so violently broken, would need to be rebuilt, stem by stem, petal by petal. The chasm between their worlds was still vast. But for the first time, they were standing on the same side of it, their hands joined in a shared, hopeful purpose. They stood together in the quiet of the enchanted forest, two souls brought together by a 30-year-old tragedy, ready to turn the soil of their painful past and plant a new garden, together. At the end of a long journey, true healing often begins not with forgetting, but with building something new from the wreckage of the past. What do you think is the most important ingredient for forgiveness, an apology, changed behavior, or something else entirely? Let us know in the final comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.